The first thing I heard, after the crash, wasn't a sound. It was a thought. And it wasn't mine. Please be okay. Please, please be okay. I don't care about the car. I don't care about anything else, just please be okay. I opened my eyes. We were still in the car, tilted at an angle that didn't make sense, glass somewhere it shouldn't have been, and Daniel, my fiancé, the man I was supposed to be marrying in 4 months, was gripping my hand so hard it hurt, his face inches from mine, saying my name out loud. Mara, Mara, can you hear me? Say something. But I'd already heard him. Before he said a word. I'd heard the thought underneath the words, raw and unfiltered, the kind of thought a person doesn't usually let anyone see, let alone hear. I'm okay, I said. My voice came out strange, thin, disbelieving. I'm okay, Daniel, are you okay? He let out a breath that sounded like it had been held for an hour. I think so. Yeah, I'm okay. And then, very quietly, almost embarrassed, even though I hadn't said anything to prompt it, I heard you. Just now, before you said anything, I heard you think I'm okay before you actually said it. I went very still, because I had been about to say the exact same thing to him. This is that story. They kept us overnight, the hospital, as a precaution, a concussion for Daniel, a mild one, and for me, mostly bruising and the kind of full body ache that comes from a car deciding, without your permission, to stop very suddenly while you were still inside it. The doctor who examined us, a calm, unhurried man named Dr. Patel, asked the usual questions. Did we know where we were? Did we know what day it was? Did we remember the accident? We did. A delivery truck had run a red light. Daniel had swerved, hard, and we'd hit a guardrail instead of the truck, which, Dr. Patel told us, with the practiced gentleness of someone who delivers this exact sentence often, was almost certainly the only reason we were both sitting up, talking, mildly bruised, instead of something much worse. What I didn't tell Dr. Patel, what neither of us told him, not that night, not for weeks afterward, was the other thing. The thing that had started in the car and hadn't stopped since. We could hear each other. Not voices, exactly, not constantly, and not in full sentences, the way people in stories about telepathy always seem to manage, a clean stream of dialogue running between two minds like a phone call. It was messier than that. Fragments, mostly, surges of thought that arrived clearest when emotion spiked, and faded, frustratingly, the calmer either of us got. That first night, in adjoining hospital beds, separated by a thin curtain neither of us had asked the nurse to draw fully closed, I heard Daniel think, clear as anything, I almost lost her. I almost lost her and I never even told her about. The thought cut off. The way thoughts do, sometimes, when the person thinking them catches themselves. Daniel, I said, into the dark. What were you about to tell me? A long silence. You heard that? His voice was careful. The cutting off part? I heard, I never even told her about, I said. And then nothing. What didn't you tell me? Another silence, and then, quietly, almost laughing, the particular laugh of someone caught completely off guard by their own life. I was going to propose 2 weeks from now. At the lake house. I had the ring already. I picked it up Tuesday. I wasn't going to tell you until then. And apparently I can't even keep that a secret anymore, because my own brain won't shut up. I lay there in that hospital bed, bruised, exhausted, glass still somewhere in my hair that the nurses hadn't quite managed to get all the way out, and laughed too. A real laugh, the kind that hurt my ribs and felt wonderful anyway. I already said yes, I said. In my head, just now, before you even technically asked. I heard that, he said. Mara, I heard that. We lay there, in the dark, in adjoining hospital beds, laughing quietly at the absurdity of having just survived a car accident and discovered, in the same breath, that we could read each other's minds, and somewhere underneath the laughter, a thought arrived from him, clear and warm and entirely undefended, the kind of thought a person only has when they've forgotten, for a moment, that anyone might be listening. I have never been more sure of anything in my life. I didn't say anything back. I didn't need to. He'd already heard mine. The weeks after the accident were strange in a way that's hard to describe to anyone who hasn't lived through something that rearranges the basic rules of what's possible. We didn't tell anyone. That decision happened almost without discussion, a shared, immediate instinct that this wasn't something either of our families, or our friends, or certainly any doctor, was going to receive well. We can hear each other's thoughts now, since the accident was not a sentence either of us could imagine saying out loud to another living person without it ending in a referral to a neurologist, or worse, a psychiatrist, or worse still, both. So instead, privately, just the two of us, we started figuring out the rules. It wasn't constant. That was the first thing we learned, and probably the most important. If it had been constant, I think it would have broken us within a month. No relationship, however strong, survives total unfiltered access to every passing thought the other person has, including the unkind ones, the petty ones, the thoughts everyone has and nobody means. What we had was narrower than that, and in its narrowness, I came to understand, kinder than it could have been. It triggered on emotional spikes, fear, surprise, sudden joy, the kind of feeling that arrives too fast for a person to filter it before it became, somehow, audible to the other. Calm moments produced almost nothing. We could sit across from each other at dinner, ordinary and quiet, and hear nothing at all, the way two people normally don't hear each other's interior monologue over a meal. But the moment one of us felt something sharply, worry, delight, a flash of jealousy at a stranger flirting with the other at a party, the other heard it, clear and immediate, like a radio catching a strong signal. "It's going to take some getting used to," Daniel said, about 3 weeks in, after I'd accidentally heard him think something uncharitable about his own mother during a tense phone call, and he'd gone slightly red when I raised an eyebrow at him afterward. "I don't think before I feel things. Nobody does. I just didn't used to have an audience for it. I don't think it's a bad thing," I said, carefully. "I've been thinking about it. I think most relationships fail, eventually, because of small dishonesties. Not big betrayals, necessarily. Just the little gap between what people say and what they actually feel, building up over years, until nobody trusts the gap isn't hiding something larger. We don't get to have that gap anymore. I think that might end up being a gift, even though it doesn't always feel like one." Daniel was quiet for a moment, considering that. "What if one of us doesn't like what we hear?" he asked. "Eventually. What if I think something about you, one day, that's genuinely unkind, and you hear it, and it changes?" "Something? Then we'll know," I said. "Immediately. Instead of finding out 5 years from now, the way most people do, after it's already calcified into something neither person can name anymore. I'd rather know early. I'd rather have the chance to actually talk about it, instead of one day waking up next to someone who's spent years quietly resenting me for something I never even knew was a problem." He reached over and took my hand. "I love you," he thought, clearly, deliberately, the kind of thought a person sends on purpose, once they understand the rules well enough to do it. "I love you, and I'm not scared of this. I think I might actually be grateful for it." "I heard that," I said, smiling. "I know," he said. "I meant for you to." There was one evening, about a month in, when we came close to telling someone, my mother, of all people, during a dinner where she'd asked, with the particular gentle persistence mothers have, whether everything was really okay after the accident, beyond the physical injuries. I'd felt the words rising in me, unbidden. "Actually, Mom, something strange happened, something I don't fully understand. Daniel and I can hear each other's," and I'd felt, simultaneously, a sharp jolt of alarm from Daniel, sitting beside me, who'd caught the thought a half-second before I could stop it from forming any further. "Don't. Not yet. Not until we understand it better ourselves." I'd looked at him, and he'd looked back at me, and neither of us had said anything out loud, and my mother, watching the silent exchange with the particular suspicion mothers reserve for moments when their children are clearly communicating something they're not supposed to notice, had said, "What was that? You two just did a whole conversation with your eyebrows." "Nothing," I'd said, laughing it off. "Just tired. Recovering takes a lot out of you." It wasn't a satisfying answer, and I don't think my mother fully believed it, but she'd let it go. The way people let things go when pressing further feels like more trouble than it's worth. Afterward, in the car, Daniel had apologized. "I didn't mean to stop you. I panicked. I wasn't ready for anyone else to know yet, and I felt you about to say it, and I." "You don't have to apologize," I said. "I felt the same panic, the second I caught your reaction." We agreed not to tell anyone. I think some part of me just wanted to share something this strange with someone who's known me my whole life. It doesn't mean I actually thought it was a good idea. "Do you think we'll ever tell anyone?" he asked. "Maybe someday," I said. "When we understand it better. When we're sure it's not going to go away, or change into something we don't recognize. For now, I think it's safer as something that's just ours." I didn't know yet how soon that decision, to keep it private, to keep it ours, would matter for reasons that had nothing to do with awkward dinner conversations, and everything to do with two people who were about to try to use the space between us for something much less innocent than a mother's curiosity. The trouble started, as these things often do, somewhere we weren't looking, not in our own relationship, where the ability had, if anything, made things steadier, but in the wider circle of people around us, the friends and exes and old histories that every engaged couple carries forward, mostly unexamined, into a new life. It began with a lunch. Priya, a friend from college who'd stayed close to both of us, the kind of mutual friend who'd known Daniel since before he and I had even met, invited me to lunch, about 2 months after the accident, and partway through, between bites of salad, she said, carefully, in the tone of someone delivering something she debated whether to mention at all, "I probably shouldn't say anything. But I ran into Vanessa last week." Vanessa, Daniel's ex, the relationship before me, 2 years long, ended amicably enough, by all accounts, about a year before he and I started dating. I'd met her exactly twice, both times briefly, both times pleasant in the careful, slightly performative way exes are pleasant when they're trying to demonstrate, to everyone present, how mature they are about the whole thing. "Okay," I said, "how is she?" "She seemed fine," Priya said. "Good, actually. But she asked about you and Daniel. About the wedding. And she said something that's been bugging me since." Priya hesitated. She said she'd heard, from someone, that Daniel had been seen having dinner with his other ex, Claire, recently. Like, recently. And she made this little comment about how she wasn't surprised, and something about how Daniel always kept his options open, and I didn't love hearing that, honestly, and I didn't know if I should tell you, but it felt weird not to. I sat with my fork halfway to my mouth, and felt something cold move through my chest. Claire, Daniel's ex before Vanessa, a relationship even further back, college era, that had ended badly enough that Daniel rarely mentioned her at all, and when he did, it was with a careful, closed-off tone that I'd always read as old hurt rather than ongoing feeling. I didn't say anything to Priya about how I felt. I thanked her for telling me, finished my lunch, and went home, and the entire drive back, I felt something building in my chest that I didn't have a name for yet, not quite jealousy, not quite suspicion, something closer to a held breath, waiting to find out whether it had a reason to be afraid. Daniel was home when I got there, working at the kitchen table, and the moment I walked in, before I'd said a single word, he looked up, and I watched his face change, fast, the way it always did when something in me spiked sharply enough to cross over. "What's wrong?" he asked. "I just heard, Mara, I heard something. Fear, I think. Or close to it. What happened?" And there it was, the thing I would spend the rest of this story being endlessly, quietly grateful for, even in the middle of feeling afraid. I didn't have to decide whether to bring it up carefully, whether to test the waters, whether to watch his reaction for the first sign of guilt before deciding how hard to push. He already knew something was wrong. The only thing left to do was tell him what. "Priya told me something," I said. "About Vanessa." She said Vanessa heard you'd been seen having dinner with Claire recently." I watched his face, and more importantly, I listened, and what I heard, immediately, overwhelmingly, was confusion. Genuine, uncomplicated confusion, with nothing underneath it that felt like the careful scrambling of a man caught. "What? I haven't seen Claire in, I don't even know. Years. What is Priya talking about?" "I haven't seen Claire in years," he said, out loud, a half second after I'd already heard the thought. "Mara, I promise you, I haven't even spoken to her since before we started dating. I don't even have her number anymore, I think I deleted it ages ago. Where would Vanessa have even gotten that?" And this was the moment I understood, with a clarity that settled something in my chest before it had even fully had the chance to spiral, exactly what we had that most couples in this situation never get. I wasn't choosing to believe him because I wanted to. I wasn't choosing to believe him despite a flicker of doubt I was suppressing for the sake of the relationship. I'd heard the truth, a half second before he said it. There was no gap, this time, between what he said and what he felt, and the absence of that gap was, itself, the entire answer. "I believe you," I said. "I heard you, before you even said it. There's nothing there." Daniel exhaled, slowly, and came around the table, and pulled me into a hug that I felt in my whole sore, still healing body. "Then where's it coming from?" he asked, "into my hair." "Because that's a very specific, very wrong thing for someone to say. That's not just gossip. That's someone making something up, on purpose. I want to be honest. If it had stopped there, one strange, false rumor from an ex with an obvious motive to stir something up, I think we would have shrugged it off within a week. Exes say petty things. It happens. It's not usually evidence of a plan. It didn't stop there. 10 days later, my own ex entered the picture. Sam, the relationship before Daniel, 2 years that had ended, on my side at least, with relief more than heartbreak, though I'd always suspected Sam felt differently, in the quiet, slightly resentful way some people feel about breakups they didn't choose. I heard about it from my sister, Lena, who'd run into Sam at a coffee shop near her office. He asked about you, Lena told me, over the phone, in the careful tone people use when they're about to repeat something they don't necessarily believe but feel obligated to pass along anyway. About the wedding. And he said, Mara, he said he'd heard you'd been stressed about money, and something about Daniel not really being able to provide the life you're used to, and that he'd heard you'd been looking into other options. I told him that sounded made up, because it did, but he was very specific about it. Like he'd heard it from somewhere. I sat with the phone against my ear, in our kitchen, and felt the same cold thing move through my chest that I'd felt after Priya's lunch, except this time, layered with something else. Recognition. This is the same shape, I thought, clearly enough that Daniel, in the next room, immediately appeared in the kitchen doorway, his face already alert. What did you hear? He asked. I told him, and I watched his face do something I hadn't seen before, not confusion, this time, but a kind of sharpening, the look of a person assembling pieces that were starting, finally, to form an actual picture. Vanessa says I'm seeing Claire, he said, slowly. Sam says you're looking at other options because I can't provide for you. Two completely different rumors, about two completely different things, both designed to do the exact same thing. Make us doubt each other, I said. Make us doubt each other, he agreed. Which means either this is an enormous coincidence, two exes, completely unconnected, independently deciding to spread rumors about us in the same 2-week window, or it's not a coincidence at all. I thought about Vanessa and Sam, two people who, as far as I knew, had never met, had no reason to know each other, existed in completely separate parts of our lives with no overlap I'd ever been aware of. They don't even know each other, I said. Do they? Daniel was quiet for a moment. I don't know, he said slowly. Actually, I don't know that for certain at all. I just assumed they didn't, because why would they? We didn't confront anyone directly, not yet. Instead, we did something that felt, at the time, almost too simple. We started paying closer attention to the people delivering the rumors, rather than the rumors themselves. Priya, when I brought it up again, casually, over a second lunch a week later, mentioned something that hadn't seemed significant the first time, because she hadn't thought to connect it to anything. Vanessa was weirdly specific about the dinner thing, Priya said, frowning, trying to remember the exact conversation. Like, she said it was at that Italian place on Forsyth, the one near the old apartment complex. Which is a very specific detail for something she supposedly heard from someone. I remember thinking, at the time, that it sounded like she'd actually seen it, or thought she had, rather than just heard a rumor secondhand. Did she say who told her? I asked. Priya thought about it. She said, someone mentioned it to her. I didn't push, it felt like prying, at the time. But now that you're asking. She trailed off. Actually, now I think about it, she seemed almost eager to tell me. Like she wanted it to get back to you. Which is a weird way to act about something you supposedly heard secondhand and don't have a personal stake in. I filed that away, and that evening, told Daniel, who'd been doing something similar with Lena, on my side of things. Sam was specific too, he said. Lena said he mentioned a money problem, specifically connected to the wedding venue deposit, which is oddly precise for a rumor. We haven't even finalized the venue yet. Only about 4 people know we're still deciding between 2 places. You, me, the wedding planner, and. He stopped. And who? I asked. Priya, he said slowly. We mentioned it to Priya at dinner, a few weeks ago. She was helping us think through the catering options for both venues. I felt something settle into place, not quite an accusation, not yet, but the first real shape of something larger than 2 unrelated petty exes. Priya wouldn't do that, I said, automatically, and then stopped myself because I realized I was doing exactly the thing the ability was supposed to protect us from, assuming, rather than checking. I don't think she would either, Daniel said. But I think someone got that detail from somewhere, and the list of people who had it is short enough that it's worth being careful. Not accusing her, just careful. The break came from a place neither of us expected. A wedding planning group chat that included me, Daniel, Priya, and, almost as an afterthought, added weeks ago when the guest list had briefly overlapped with an old friend group, Vanessa's younger cousin, Beth, who'd been invited to the wedding mostly out of politeness, because she and I had been casually friendly years ago, long before Daniel and Vanessa had even met. Beth rarely posted in the chat. She was peripheral, the kind of person included more out of courtesy than active involvement. But one evening, scrolling back through old messages to find a caterer's contact information, I noticed something I hadn't paid attention to before. Beth had reacted, with a small laughing emoji, to a message Priya had sent weeks earlier, the same message where Priya had mentioned the two venues we were deciding between. It was such a small thing. An emoji reaction, nothing more. But it meant Beth had seen that detail too, and Beth, I now remembered, with a slow creeping unease, was Vanessa's cousin. Daniel, I said, that night, showing him my phone. I think I found the connection. He looked at the screen for a long moment. Beth and Vanessa are close, he said slowly. I remember now. Vanessa used to talk about her all the time, when we were together. They're more like sisters than cousins, she always said. He looked up at me. If Beth saw that detail in the group chat, and mentioned it to Vanessa. Then Vanessa didn't need to see anything herself, I said. She just needed someone harmless, someone nobody would suspect, sitting quietly in a group chat, passing along small true details that she could then build a false story around. The venue detail makes the money rumor sound specific and credible. And if Vanessa and Sam are coordinating somehow, then we still don't know how they're connected to each other, Daniel said. That's the piece that doesn't fit yet. Why would my ex and your ex be working together at all? They've never even met. I didn't have an answer to that yet. But I had something I hadn't had before. A thread. A real one, not a feeling, not a fragment of an overheard thought, but an actual, traceable connection between a detail only a handful of people knew and a rumor that had appeared in the world a week later, exactly shaped to do maximum damage to something we'd both, until 2 weeks ago, considered unshakable. We need to find out how Vanessa and Sam know each other, I said. Because I don't think this is two separate, unrelated bitter exes anymore. I think this is one plan, with two people running it. It was Daniel who found the connection, 4 days later, and it came from the most unglamorous place imaginable. A dating app neither of us used anymore, that he'd kept installed on his phone out of sheer laziness, the way everyone keeps apps they meant to delete a year ago. I wasn't looking for anything, he said, showing me his screen, half apologetic, half urgent. I just opened it because I got a notification. Some people you may know feature it. Suggests mutual connections sometimes. And look, the screen showed a profile. Sam's profile, my Sam, unmistakably, the same photo he'd used on every app for years, the one of him hiking that he was clearly proud of. And beneath it, the small line the app used to suggest a shared connection. You both know Vanessa Pierce. They're connected, I said slowly. On an app, which means they at least know each other through some mutual circle, Daniel said. Maybe more than that. I don't know how deep it goes. But it's not nothing, Mara. It's a real link, not a coincidence. We sat with that for a long moment, and then I did something that felt, in the moment, slightly absurd, and in retrospect, was probably the single most useful thing either of us did in this entire story. I texted Beth. Not accusingly, carefully, casually, the way you'd text someone you genuinely liked and had no reason yet to suspect of anything. Hey, random question. Is your cousin Vanessa seeing anyone these days? Trying to figure out +1s for the wedding and didn't want to assume either way. Beth responded within the hour, cheerful and entirely unguarded, exactly the way someone responds when they have no idea they're being asked anything strategic at all. OMG, yes, actually. She's been seeing this guy Sam for like 2 months. They're so cute together. Met through a mutual friend, I think. She seems really happy. I stared at that message for a long time before I showed it to Daniel. They're dating, I said. Vanessa and Sam. They're actually together. Daniel read the message twice, and something shifted in his face. Not surprise, exactly, but the specific click of a puzzle piece finally finding its place after sitting wrong for days. That changes everything, he said slowly. This isn't two bitter exes who happen to coordinate out of some shared grudge. This is two people in an actual relationship, who found out, somehow, that they each had history with one half of an engaged couple, and decided, together, that breaking us up would benefit them both. Benefit them how? I asked. What do they actually get out of it? Daniel was quiet for a moment, thinking. I don't know yet, he said. But I think we should find out. Carefully. Before we do anything else. Before we found the motive, there was a stretch of about a week where the toll of everything started to show. Not as doubt between us, but as exhaustion, the specific tiredness that comes from being under quiet siege by people you can't yet name. I remember one night in particular, lying in bed, unable to sleep, running through the same questions over and over. Who else had heard the rumors? Who else might be quietly recalculating their opinion of our relationship based on secondhand gossip they had no way of verifying? how many more strange coincidences would arrive before we understood what was actually happening to us? Daniel, beside me, felt it before I said anything, the specific shape of anxious, looping thought, different from fear, different from sadness, just the exhausting friction of a mind that wouldn't stop turning over the same unresolved problem. You're spiraling, he said quietly, into the dark. Not a question. A little, I admitted. I keep thinking about all the people who might have heard something and just never mentioned it to us. People who maybe believed it, even a little, and are just being polite enough not to bring it up. I hate not knowing how far it's spread. I know, he said. I've been thinking about the same thing. I think, he paused, considering. I think we have to let go of controlling how far it's spread, because we can't, not really. What we can control is making sure the people who matter most know the truth, clearly, before any of it has the chance to calcify into something they half believe without ever examining it. That's a very calm way of putting something that's keeping me awake at midnight, I said, half laughing despite myself. I'm not actually that calm, he admitted. I just didn't want to add my version of spiraling on top of yours. Seemed inefficient, given that we'd both end up hearing the other one anyway. I laughed for real, that time, a tired, grateful laugh, the kind that comes from realizing, in the middle of something genuinely stressful, that you're not actually carrying it alone, the way you might have expected to, the way every previous version of yourself in every previous relationship had quietly assumed you'd have to. This is the part one don't think Vanessa and Sam understand, I said, after a while. Whatever they're trying to do, however clever they think their plan is, they're assuming we're going to react the way two ordinary, separate people would. Doubt building privately in each of us, separately, until it becomes something neither of us can name out loud. But we don't get to spiral alone. Even when we want to, even at midnight, even about something as small as not being able to sleep, we're stuck doing it together. Good, Daniel said. I don't want to do any of this alone. Not even the bad parts. It was, I think, the moment I stopped being frightened of whatever was coming next, and started, instead, feeling something closer to certainty. Not that we'd win, exactly, because we still didn't know who we were up against, or why. Just certainty that whatever it turned out to be, we were going to face it as one unit, rather than two people slowly being worn down in parallel, unable to fully share the weight of what was happening to them. It was 3 days after that conversation that the motive finally came into focus. The answer, when it came, arrived through Priya again, not because she'd done anything wrong, but because she was, by this point, genuinely worried about us, and had started, without our asking, paying closer attention to the things Vanessa said. I had coffee with her, Priya admitted, a few days later, looking uncomfortable. I know that's weird, given everything, but I wanted to see if I could figure out what was going on, without tipping her off that you two suspected anything. And Mara, she let something slip. I don't think she meant to. What did she say? She mentioned Sam, Priya said. Just casually, like I wasn't supposed to notice it meant anything. But then she said something like, it would be nice if things went back to how they were supposed to be, and I asked what she meant, and she got weird and changed the subject. But before she did, she said one more thing. She said, Sam thinks Mara's family connections could really help him with his business. He's trying to get something off the ground, and her dad knows people. I sat very still. My father, semi-retired now, had spent 30 years in commercial real estate, and still had relationships, genuine, valuable relationships, with developers and investors across the city. Sam, in the 2 years we'd dated, had always been vaguely interested in getting into real estate himself, eventually, interested in a way that, at the time, I'd read as ambition, and that I was now reading, with a cold and entirely different clarity, as something closer to a long game. He wants back in, I said slowly. Not necessarily with me, with my family, with my dad's connections. If Sam and I got back together, or even just got close again, enough for him to be back in the family's orbit, he'd have access to exactly the kind of relationships he's been trying to build on his own for years. And Vanessa? Daniel asked, though something in his voice suggested he already half suspected the answer. Vanessa works in the same industry as Daniel, Priya said, slowly. Doesn't she? I remember her mentioning it, a while back. Some kind of consulting? Daniel's face had gone pale. She works for a firm that's been trying to get a contract with my company for over a year. We've turned them down twice, not because of her, specifically. I don't even handle that account directly, but it's a small enough firm that everyone there would benefit if the relationship between our companies improved. If she got back together with me, or even just got close enough to be seen as connected to me again, professionally, socially, it would change how people at her firm talk about the relationship between our companies. It wouldn't even need to be a real reconciliation. It would just need to look like one, to the right people, for long enough. We sat in our kitchen, the two of us, putting the entire shape of it together for the first time. Not jealousy, not lingering heartbreak, not any of the romantic motives either of us had quietly assumed, somewhere underneath the rational planning, this whole time. It was simpler than that, and somehow colder. Sam wanted access to my father's connections. Vanessa wanted to look connected enough to Daniel that her firm's prospects improved. Neither of them had ever needed to actually break us up, not completely, they just needed enough doubt, enough distance, enough plausible drama, that either of us might pull back from the other just far enough to leave room for exactly the kind of reconnection they were engineering. And they'd found each other, through some mutual friend, on some app, in some unremarkable corner of the world, and realized that their two separate, entirely self-interested plans could run in perfect parallel, each one reinforcing the other. They're not even doing this out of feeling, I said, slowly. It's not love, or jealousy, or any of the things that would almost make it forgivable. It's networking. They're trying to break up our wedding for networking. I think, Daniel said, that might be the part that makes me angriest. Somehow. Understanding the motive didn't end the campaign. If anything, it sharpened it, as though Vanessa and Sam, sensing that the first wave of rumors hadn't landed the way they'd hoped, decided the next move needed to be something neither of us could simply hear through and dismiss in an evening. It came 9 days later, in the form of a photograph. It arrived in my inbox from an account I didn't recognize, no name attached, just a string of numbers and letters, the kind of account created specifically to send one thing and disappear. The photograph showed Daniel, unmistakably, standing close to a woman outside a restaurant I didn't recognize, her hand resting on his arm, both of them laughing at something just out of frame. I felt my whole body go cold before my mind had even finished processing what I was looking at. And then, almost simultaneously, because that's how it worked between us by then, emotion arriving on his end a half-second behind mine, like an echo catching up to a sound. Daniel appeared in the doorway of the room I was sitting in, his face already alarmed. Mara, what's wrong? I felt something. It felt like fear, but sharper. What happened? I turned my phone toward him without a word. He stared at the photograph for a long moment, and I watched his face do something complicated, not guilt, not the scrambling denial of someone caught, but genuine confusion, the specific bewilderment of a person looking at evidence of something they have no memory of doing. He started, and then stopped, and looked closer. Mara, I don't know who that is. I don't recognize this restaurant. He looked up at me. The confusion was sharpening now, fast, into something closer to alarm. When was this supposedly taken? I checked the metadata, the little timestamp embedded in the image file, the kind of detail most people never think to check. It says 3 days ago. Tuesday, around 7 in the evening. Daniel went very still. Tuesday at 7, he said slowly, I was at the office. With 4 other people, in a budget meeting that ran almost 2 hours over. I have the calendar invite. I have an email thread where 3 different coworkers were complaining about how long it ran. There were witnesses, Mara. A lot of them. I want to be honest about this moment, because I think it's the part of the story that matters most, more than the dating app, more than the motive, more than almost anything else that happened. Because here is the truth. Even with everything I knew, even with months of hearing nothing but honesty from him, even with an ability that had never once, not a single time, caught him in something he was hiding, for about 4 seconds, looking at that photograph, I felt a flicker of something cold and uncertain move through me anyway. It wasn't disbelief in him, exactly. It was something smaller and more human than that. The simple, animal jolt of seeing a photograph that looked real, of a person you love standing close to someone else, laughing, in a moment you weren't part of. Photographs do something to the nervous system that reasoning doesn't always catch up to fast enough to prevent. And Daniel heard it. Of course he heard it, the flicker, the 4 seconds, the cold uncertain thing, before I'd even fully named it to myself. You felt something, he said quietly. Not accusing, just naming it, the way we'd learned to do with each other, months ago, in a hospital bed, when hiding from each other had stopped being something either of us could manage even if we'd wanted to. Don't be, he said, and meant it, and I heard the meaning underneath the words, clean and immediate. I think that's a completely human thing to feel, looking at a photograph like that, even when you trust someone completely. I'd probably feel something too, if our positions were reversed. The difference is, He paused, choosing the words carefully. The difference is that the feeling lasted 4 seconds, and then it was just gone, because you heard the truth before your fear had time to build into anything bigger. That's the whole point of what we have, Mara. Not that we never feel a flicker of doubt. Just that the flicker never gets the chance to become a story we tell ourselves in the dark, alone, with no one to check it against. I thought about that for a long time, in the days that followed, while we worked out together, calmly, methodically, the way we'd approached everything since the first rumor, exactly how fabricated the photograph actually was. It took less effort than I expected. A reverse image search found the original photo within 20 minutes. A stock image, lightly edited, Daniel's face swapped onto a stranger's body with software that was good, but not quite good enough to survive close inspection once you knew to look for the slightly too smooth blend along the jawline. Someone paid for this, Daniel said, looking at the evidence of the edit, his voice flat with a kind of disgust I hadn't heard from him before. This isn't a rumor anymore, Mara. This is fabricated evidence, sent anonymously, specifically designed to do what the rumors couldn't, give us something that looked irrefutable, fast, before either of us had time to check it against anything. It almost worked, I said quietly. For 4 seconds, it almost worked. It didn't work, he said. That's the part that matters. It got 4 seconds. That's all it got. And I think that's going to make Vanessa and Sam considerably more reckless, now that even their best move only bought them 4 seconds out of an entire relationship. He was right, though neither of us could have predicted exactly how reckless. 2 days later, Priya called, her voice tight with worry, to tell us that the same photograph, the fabricated one, had been sent, anonymously, to no fewer than 6 people in our combined social circle, including, worst of all, my own mother, who'd called me in tears before I'd even had the chance to explain. They're not being careful anymore, I told Daniel, after a long, exhausting call reassuring my mother, walking her through the metadata and the reverse image search the same way we'd walked through it ourselves. They went from quiet rumors through a cousin in a group chat to mass distributing fabricated evidence to half the wedding guest list. That's not subtle anymore, that's desperate. Desperate people make mistakes, Daniel said. I think it's time we stop reacting to whatever they send next, and made them answer for what they've already sent. We decided, in the end, that the cleanest way to end it was the simplest one. Tell the truth, all of it, to exactly the people who needed to hear it, before Vanessa and Sam had any more room to maneuver. Priya helped us arrange it, a dinner, ostensibly innocent, that included Priya, Beth, and, carefully invited under the guise of finally getting everyone together properly before the wedding, both Vanessa and Sam. I want to be honest. By this point, neither of us needed our strange shared ability to know what was actually going on. We had the dating app connection, Beth's unwitting confirmation, Priya's overheard comments, a fabricated photograph we'd already traced back to its stock image origin, and a motive on each side that made the entire shape of the scheme obvious once you knew where to look. We could have simply presented the facts and let them speak for themselves. But the ability gave us something the facts alone couldn't. Certainty, in real time, the moment it mattered most. Dinner had gone politely, carefully, for almost an hour, small talk, performed warmth, everyone aware, on some level, that something was about to happen, except for Beth, who chatted easily about wedding logistics, blissfully unaware of the role she'd unknowingly played in all of it. Then Daniel set down his glass and said, simply, Vanessa, I know about you and Sam. The table went still. Vanessa's face did the thing faces do when a careful arrangement collapses faster than the person wearing it can manage, composure, then a flicker of panic, then an attempt to recover, all within about 2 seconds, and I heard, immediately, the thought underneath it, sharp and unmistakable. How could he know already? We were so careful. I don't, Vanessa started. I'm not sure what you mean. Sam and I are just dating, I said, for about 2 months, through a mutual friend. We know. And we know about the photograph too, the one you sent to my mother, among other people. We traced it back to the stock image. It wasn't hard, once we knew to look. Sam, beside her, had gone very quiet, and I heard, from him, fainter than Vanessa's thought, because I didn't have the ability with him the way I did with Daniel, but the residue of it lingered enough, in moments of sharp enough feeling, that I caught the edges of it anyway, the way you catch the last notes of a song through a closing door. She figured it out. The whole thing. How did she? You wanted my dad's connections, I said, looking at Sam directly. And you, I turned to Vanessa. You wanted to look close enough to Daniel that your firm's chances improved. Neither of you actually wanted either of us back. You just needed enough doubt to create room for exactly the kind of reconnection that would benefit you both. That's not, Vanessa started. Priya had coffee with you, I said. You mentioned Sam's business interest in my dad's connections. You weren't as careful as you thought you were being. And the photograph you sent my mother has a metadata timestamp that places it during a 2-hour budget meeting Daniel attended with 4 other people, all of whom are happy to confirm it, in writing, if this needs to go any further than this table. The silence that followed was different from any silence I'd experienced in this entire story. Not the charged silence of a confrontation building towards something, but the flat, exposed silence of a plan that had simply run out of road. Beth, beside Vanessa, looked between us all with growing horror. Wait, she said slowly. Wait, the group chat thing. The venue. Oh my God, I didn't know, I swear I didn't know what I was. We know, I said, gently, because Beth, unlike the 2 people across the table, had genuinely had no idea what she'd been part of. You didn't do anything wrong. You just got used, the same way they tried to use us. Vanessa and Sam didn't deny it, not really, not in any way that mattered. There wasn't much left to deny by that point, and I think some part of both of them understood, sitting at that table, that the entire architecture of the plan had depended on neither Daniel nor I ever comparing notes clearly enough, quickly enough, to see the whole shape of it before real damage was done. They hadn't accounted for the one thing that made comparing notes instant, instead of slow and uncertain the way it is for everyone else. I think, Daniel said, finally, standing, we're done here. We left together. Outside, in the cold evening air, walking back to the car, Daniel reached for my hand and I heard, before he said anything at all, the thought arriving clean and warm and entirely undefended, the same kind of thought he'd sent me in a hospital bed, months ago, after a crash that had given us something neither of us had asked for and both of us had come, somehow, to be grateful for. They tried to find the gap between us. There wasn't one. There wasn't one, I agreed, out loud, and he smiled, and didn't seem surprised, even slightly, that I'd already heard it. We got married 4 months later, exactly on schedule, at the venue we'd chosen weeks before anyone had ever tried to make us doubt it. Vanessa and Sam weren't invited. Beth was. Sitting near the back, slightly sheepish, entirely forgiven, because some people get used by other people's schemes without ever choosing to be part of them, and Beth, we both agreed, was one of those people. My mother cried, the good kind of crying, and afterward told me, quietly, that she'd known something had been wrong for a while. You two had a strange tension, for a few months, like you were carrying something together I wasn't allowed to see, and asked, gently, if I'd ever tell her what it had actually been. Maybe someday, I told her, echoing, almost exactly, what I'd said to Daniel myself, months earlier, in a different conversation about a different kind of secret. It's a strange story. I'm not sure you'd believe it yet. Try me sometime, she said, and squeezed my hand, and I thought, watching her walk away to greet another guest, that maybe someday I actually would. Priya gave a toast that evening that made half the room cry, including me, about loyalty, about the kind of friendship that pays attention even when it would be easier not to, about how grateful she was to have been some small part of helping us see clearly when other people were trying very hard to make sure we couldn't. She didn't know the full truth either. Not the part about the thoughts, the hospital bed, the strange ability neither of us had asked for. But she knew enough, and what she knew, she'd used well, and I will be grateful to her for the rest of my life for the small, unglamorous diligence of simply noticing things and telling us what she noticed. Late in the evening, after most of the toasts were done and the dancing had started, Daniel found me near the edge of the room, where I'd stepped away for a quiet moment, and pulled me close, and we swayed there for a while without speaking, the way you do at the end of a long day that has finally, completely, become what it was always supposed to be. I keep thinking about the hospital bed, he thought, clear and warm, the kind of thought he sent on purpose now, deliberately, the way some people write letters instead of texts because the slower, more intentional version of a feeling means something different. I keep thinking about how scared I was, in that car, before either of us understood what was happening. And how strange it is that the scariest night of my life turned out to be the thing that protected us from the worst thing that happened after it. I think about that too, I said, out loud, resting my head against his shoulder. I think about how easy it would have been, without it. A photograph. A few rumors, timed right. I think about how many couples that exact playbook probably works on, every single day, people who never get the chance we got to simply check, instantly, whether the doubt someone planted in them has any truth underneath it at all. Do you think we'd have made it anyway? He asked. Without the ability. If it had just been us, trying to work through it the normal way, slowly, with nothing but trust and conversation. I thought about that honestly, because I owed him an honest answer, even on our wedding night, even with the music still playing behind us. I'd like to think so, I said. I'd like to think we're the kind of people who would have asked the right questions, eventually, and trusted each other enough to get there. But I'm glad we didn't have to find out the hard way. I'm glad we got certainty instead of just hope. Me too, he said, and kissed the top of my head, the same way he had on countless ordinary mornings before any of this began, back when neither of us had any idea what the next year was going to ask of us. I don't know if the ability will last forever. Some mornings it feels as strong as it did in that hospital bed, other days, weeks pass where neither of us hears anything from the other at all, content in the ordinary, comfortable silence of two people who don't need to read each other's minds to know exactly where they stand. But I know this. Whatever Vanessa and Sam thought they understood about relationships. That doubt could be planted, that distance could be engineered, that the right rumor in the right ear could quietly hollow out even something as solid as an engagement. They were working from an old playbook. One built for couples who keep their fears to themselves, who let small doubts calcify in silence, who let the gap between what they feel and what they say grow wide enough for someone clever to slip something poisonous into it. We don't have a gap. We never will again. That's the whole of it. That's what the accident actually gave us, not just the ability to hear each other, but proof, delivered in the coldest, most calculating way too near strangers could devise, that there was nothing in either of us worth finding, because there was nothing hidden left to find.